The wild, untamed places of our world, they hold a primal fascination, don't they? There's this call to something deep inside us, a mix of awe and maybe, well, an ancient instinctual fear. Today, we're not really dissecting complex theories or, intricate historical puzzles. Instead, we're plunging headfirst into that fear. We're looking at real, unsettling accounts of encounters and disappearances deep in the woods that, well, they just defy easy explanation. We've drawn these stories from some compelling sources, and each one leaves behind these disturbing questions, a lingering sense of unease. Our mission today is really just to immerse you in these narratives. Let the facts themselves weave a captivating and honestly a pretty terrifying tale. Think of it less as our usual deep dive into data, maybe more like an immersive journey into the unsettling unknown. So, prepare for some genuine shivers down your spine. We'll begin our journey into the unsettling with a chilling story. It's from the late 1970s, set in the logging camps near Lumbee, British Columbia. Our narrator, at the time, he was a young logger, just trying to scrape enough money together for a motorcycle, Working a job so dangerous that injuries were basically, they were a given. It was a brutal way to earn a living, sure, but the pay was good. And that's where Adam McNally signed on. He was another kid, same age, similar sort of background, apparently. But McNally was quiet. Kind of lazy, people said, and frankly, a bit weird. He was always late, even when they were staying right there in the logging camps with nowhere else to be. And he'd disappear for hours at a time. The crew, they kind of thought maybe he was off getting high, but, well, they could never actually prove it. Then one day, McNally just vanished. The crew he was working with said he walked into the woods to take a leak, was the phrase used, and that was the last they ever saw of him. Since they weren't at a main logging camp that day, the other guys just figured he'd quit. Walked back to Lumbee. They didn't even really notice he was gone for maybe 3 or 4 hours. But then a week later, McNally's mom showed up at the foreman's office. Worried sick. She hadn't heard from him since he walked off the job. Now, what's strange is she apparently spent days driving around looking for him herself before finally involving the police. That made some people wonder if maybe he was involved in something, illegal. But then the cops showed up. They organized the loggers into a search party, marching them in these long lines through the woods where McNally had last been seen. And then, after walking for what felt like forever, one of the guys calls out. He'd found something. It was a single boot, just one solitary boot lying there in the dirt. Nobody could say for sure it was McNally's, but somehow, everyone just knew. The police were called in then to continue the search properly. So the camp was buzzing with theories. Some thought, it's all fuss over nothing, just a boot that slipped off. Others were convinced, no, this is a murder investigation now. Days later, McNally's body was found. The police were very tight-lipped, but rumors started swirling, especially once reporters got wind of it. What everyone heard, the main rumor, was that the body was found in pieces, not whole. So initially the assumption was, okay, an animal attack? Bear, maybe? But then things took a really baffling turn. A few days later, the police returned to the logging camp, this time with a search warrant. They turned the place upside down. Then they left with 3 members of McNally's crew for questioning, suspecting them of murder. The loggers thought, holy crap, did they just get sick of him and, disappear him? But it seemed totally insane. And sure enough, those 3 were later released. No charges. Then came the truly horrifying truth. And the local police all but confirmed it by basically refusing to deny the rumors circulating. McNally's body had not been cut by a chainsaw. His arms, legs, and head had been, the word used was torn off. Torn off before being stacked all neatly inside a hollowed-out tree trunk. Our narrator, years later, still wonders what happened out there. Was it something explainable or something else entirely? Because if it was that something else, it could have just as easily been him ripped up and stacked. I mean, that detail, the stacked neatly part, that's what really gets you, isn't it?
It absolutely is. From a forensic perspective, that specific detail, the neatly stacked arrangement after such violent dismemberment, that's what truly confounds traditional analysis. It pushes this case way beyond the usual patterns of both human violence, even extreme violence, and well-known animal predation. This isn't just about the act of tearing limbs off, it's the methodical, almost deliberate ceremonial display of the remains. It's chilling. It suggests either a perpetrator with a very unique ritualistic signature, or maybe a phenomenon that simply defies our current understanding of what's possible in the wild. That kind of anomaly, that's the chilling nugget that fuels continued speculation in cases like this one.
Okay, let's shift gears now to a different type of terrifying wilderness encounter. This one's a survival trip that went horribly wrong for a group of friends in the UK. This story unfolds in December 2007. 2 friends, Luke and Ben, they made a 100-pound bet just to see who could last longest out in the wilderness. And they pulled their other friend, our narrator for this story, into it as the adjudicator, the judge, basically. Their chosen location was Kielder Forest in Northumberland. It's known for being truly wild, maybe one of the closest things to actual wilderness you can find in the UK. So they began their hike, but they were pretty unprepared for the brutal reality. Sleeping outside in early March, even without snow, was rough. The wind was howling. Their sort of fun, adventurous trip quickly started becoming a bit of a nightmare. 2 hours into their second day, hiking through increasingly difficult terrain, they stumbled upon something unexpected. Burnside Lodge. It was a derelict cottage, and next to it, a smaller stone bothy, like a basic unlocked shelter, free of charge for anyone to use. It looked like a godsend, especially with rain clearly on the way. But as they were checking it out, an unsettling arrival, a man emerged from the nearby tree line. He had a large dog with him, barking aggressively. He shouted something like, "Oi, what's going on over there?" And initially, he sort of played this weird joke on them about trespassing, claiming he was the owner. But his demeanor quickly shifted. It got odd. Then came the truly disturbing interaction. As the man's dog kept behaving aggressively, growling, lunging, the man, who vaguely introduced himself as Gary, a name our narrator felt was obviously fake, he asked the most shocking and inappropriate question imaginable, just out of the blue. With this chilling grin, he asked, "Have any of you ever been RAPED?" And then, without even waiting for a response, he just stated flatly, "I have." The friends were just stunned and enraged. The dog kept lunging, its owner barely restraining it. Right, so the immediate consequence was crystal clear. They were absolutely not staying in that bothy. No way. Deeply shaken, utterly creeped out, they abandoned the idea of shelter and decided to brave the elements again. They just wanted to get away from Gary and his dog, fast. But the terror wasn't over yet. As they fled, maybe 10, 15 minutes later, they soon heard it, the faint sound of the dog barking, and it was getting progressively louder behind them. The chilling realization just dawned on them. Gary and his dog were tracking them, following them through the woods. The fear ramped up another notch then as he started wondering, okay, what weapons might this guy have? Out here, in the middle of nowhere. Their narrow escape came when they reached a stream, a wide, deep one. They just plunged in, wading through the freezing water, their packs getting soaked and incredibly heavy. But to their surprise, the dog stopped right at the opposite bank. It just stood there barking, but it wouldn't cross the water. Then it turned and ran back the way it came, presumably towards its owner. It felt like a miracle, honestly, but they didn't stick around to figure out why. They just kept going. They finally reached the edge of the forest, totally exhausted, freezing, but alive. They tried to contact the police later, but reception was bad and with limited details. Well, they received very little assistance. The narrator emphasizes that, yeah, the dog was dangerous, obviously, but it was the man's vile question, that creepy grin, his whole demeanor. That's what truly unsettled them. It left this deep terror that has since made them really uneasy about hiking in remote areas, especially after dark.
Yeah, this story really highlights how profoundly unsettling human encounters in isolated settings can be. It's different from facing a natural danger, isn't it? The threat of another person, especially when their intent is so unclear and just disturbing like that, it preys on a very specific set of primal fears. You know, the fear of a malevolent intelligence, of betrayal, the sheer unknown intentions of another human. It's often far more psychologically scarring than, say, just getting injured, because it violates that fundamental sense of safety and trust we have or hope to have in other people. It leaves this lingering unease that, simple nature just can't replicate.
Okay, let's explore a slightly different kind of wilderness fear now. This one was experienced by someone who actually sought out the thrill of hiking alone at night in remote areas. So, not a novice, this was an experienced hiker. The scene is set. It was late spring, maybe around 4:30 a.m., just about an hour before dawn. The hiker was down in a low hollow, kind of wedged between two steep ridges, focused on the narrow, muddy trail, headlamp cutting through the dark. Then, just out of nowhere, this completely unnatural sound shattered the stillness. It was described as a loud, explosive crack, not like a branch breaking naturally or a deadfall hitting the ground. No. It sounded like a decent-sized wooden stick being violently whacked against a smallish tree. That's the description. The key thing was its intentional quality. It felt deliberate, powerful, like someone put all their strength into it, and it sounded close, maybe 50 yards ahead on the trail. So as the hiker freezes listening, this horrific, overpowering smell drifts through the air, and it wasn't the smell of death or decay. Our narrator knew that smell well from hiking. This was something else, something described as very much alive. The description is visceral, unforgettable. If you took wet dog smell, multiplied it by like 1,000, then threw in a little fresh durian fruit, then filtered it all through a wet diaper, just foul beyond imagination, but distinctly not rotten. I mean, can you even process that smell in that moment in the dark?
Wow. Yeah, that triggers something primal, doesn't it?
Because unlike sight or sound, smell is so pervasive. You can't just close your eyes or cover your ears. It invades your personal space, your senses. It bypasses the rational mind and hits those ancient parts of the brain hardwired for danger detection. And when a smell is that incredibly foul, yet clearly not lean to decay, it generates this profound sense of the uncanny, something truly alien and alive nearby. Which is arguably one of the most fundamentally terrifying kinds of sensory input you could have in a wilderness setting like that.
Exactly. Then after a moment, a second thwack. Just as violent, just as loud, wood on wood. At that point, the hiker's logical brain just gave way to pure primal fear. They knew instinctively they had to get out of there, give the area a very wide berth. They chose to flee, turning around, heading back the way they came, abandoning their planned route entirely. They described running harder and longer than they ever had before in their entire life, just driven by this overwhelming instinctual terror. Now, the hiker, despite having heard theories about Bigfoot or other weird stuff, doesn't really believe in any of that, not a believer in the supernatural, but they emphatically state that whatever they encountered that morning in the woods, whatever made that noise and produced that smell, it was really, really scary, undeniably real and terrifying.
Right. And this kind of account really highlights how experiences that just defy easy categorization can often be the most profoundly terrifying. The human mind instinctively seeks to understand and categorize threats, right? So we know how to react. But when an experience is so alien, so inexplicable, the sound, the smell, the feeling, there's no framework for it. There's no previous experience to draw on. It just leaves the individual with this pervasive sense of vulnerability to the unknown, to something they can't even name. And that can leave the deepest psychological mark.
Okay, we turn now to our final story, a truly baffling cold case from February 1978, the vanishing of 5 young men from Yuba City, California. It's often called the Yuba County 5 case. This group included 25-year-old Gary Deal Mathias and 4 of his close friends. All of them had varying intellectual or psychiatric disabilities, and they were part of a Special Olympics basketball team called the Gateway Gators. They were known to be very close-knit. Their last known movements were on the evening of February 24th. They played a basketball game, then stopped at a bear's market near Chico State University around 10 p.m. to grab snacks. Witnesses said they were sober, happy, and in high spirits. They bought soda, candy bars, milk. They were expected back home in Yuba City around midnight. 4 days later, their car, a 1969 Mercury Montego, was found, but it was 70 miles off their intended route home. 70 miles, deep in a remote forest area, high up in the Plumas National Forest on a snowbound mountain road. And the car itself was undamaged, it was operational, it had about a quarter tank of gas left, but the keys were missing. This immediately suggested they left willingly, maybe intending to return. But the huge question is, why abandon a perfectly good vehicle in freezing weather miles from anywhere? Especially since the driver, Jack Madruga, was known by his family to absolutely hate cold weather and supposedly would never have driven up there voluntarily. That's the first massive head scratcher here, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's a huge red flag. In cases like this, when you find a functional vehicle abandoned so far off-road, particularly in harsh conditions like heavy snow, it rarely points to just getting lost or having a simple breakdown. It strongly implies there is some compelling external reason for them to exit that car, or perhaps a profound shared disorientation. It suggests they either perceived a significant threat outside the car or somehow believed leaving the vehicle was the safer or only option available to them, which in that environment is far more unsettling than just, taking a wrong turn.
Yeah, exactly. And the case got even more complicated with these mysterious sightings. There was Joseph Shawns. He claimed he suffered a heart attack while stuck in his own car on that same mountain road that same night. He said he saw headlights approach, saw a group of people, maybe including a woman and a baby, get out of a car resembling theirs. He cried for help, but they just looked at him, turned off their lights, and ignored him. Now, this account conflicted sharply with what was known about Ted Weir, one of the 5, who was generally considered kind and helpful. His family couldn't imagine him ignoring someone in distress. Then, 2 days after the disappearance, there was another sighting. An employee at a grocery store in Brownsville, a small town miles away but sort of along a convoluted route back from the mountains, saw 2 men resembling some of the group. They bought specific items, burritos, chocolate milk, soda paid in cash, and acted skittishly, apparently. Ted Weir's brother found this sighting particularly credible because Ted had a known habit of drinking excessive amounts of chocolate milk. But then, silence. Until June, after the snow finally started to melt. On June 4th, Ted Weir's body was found inside a Forest Service trailer about 20 miles, a long hike from where the car was abandoned. The trailer had been broken into. The autopsy indicated he died from hypothermia and severe starvation. He'd lost over half his body weight, maybe 100 pounds. This suggested he might have survived for weeks, maybe even up to 13 weeks after disappearing. But here's the truly baffling part. Inside that trailer and in a storage shed nearby were untouched boxes of sea rations, military-style packaged meals, enough food to feed all 5 men for a year. There were also matches, fuel, things to start a fire, all unused. Ted's shoes were missing, and strangely, he had a gold watch on his wrist that didn't belong to him. Just days later, the remains of 3 others, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, and Jack Hewitt, were found scattered in the woods between the trailer and the car. They'd been partially consumed by scavengers. Gary Mathias, the 5th man, his body was never found, though his tennis shoes were found inside the trailer with Ted's body. There was also evidence suggesting maybe Hewitt had tried to cover Ted with a white sheet, perhaps trying to keep him warm before he himself succumbed outside. So the critical questions just hang there, don't they? Why did they leave a working car, especially one driven by someone who hated the cold? Why didn't they use the abundant food and supplies readily available in that trailer, which could have saved them? What on earth compelled them to endure such extreme hardship, starvation, freezing temperatures leading to their deaths when survival seemed entirely possible right there in the trailer? It leads to the most chilling theory, the one that persists, that something scared the men so badly, so profoundly, that they'd rather face certain death by hypothermia and starvation than whatever they perceived was outside that trailer, potentially pursuing them. This unknown threat, whatever it was, possibly kept them trapped inside, too terrified to access the food or leave for months, and perhaps it even consumed their bodies after they died outside.
This case, yeah, perhaps more than any other we've discussed, offers us truly unsettling insight into the potential for overwhelming, perhaps irrational, fear to completely hijack human behavior, even basic survival instincts. The critical piece here isn't just that they perished, tragically. It's how they apparently chose to perish, given those readily available survival resources, the food, the fuel, the shelter. This pattern, unused food, unused fire-starting materials, alongside death from extreme exposure and starvation, it often leads investigators down a very dark path. It points towards perceived, immediate, and overwhelming threat. A threat that, in their minds, outweighed the slower but certain death from cold and hunger. It suggests a profound psychological entrapment. A terror so absolute, it literally paralyzed their most fundamental instincts for self-preservation. And that possibility, that they were pinned down by fear itself, is far more chilling than simply getting lost or falling victim to an animal. It really does suggest some kind of unseen, perhaps malevolent force at play in that wilderness.
We've recounted some profoundly disturbing stories today, haven't we? Tales of real fear and just these deep, unanswerable questions left lingering out there in the wild. These aren't just campfire stories, remember. They're accounts of moments when that veil between the known world and the inexplicable seemed to thin out, revealing something truly, deeply unsettling. These kinds of deep dives remind us that the wilderness holds secrets. It holds dangers that sometimes just defy our understanding. They leave us wondering about the something else that might be lurking just beyond the edge of what we know. A presence, maybe, that can turn a simple walk in the woods into a desperate escape from the unimaginable. So if these stories have sent shivers down your spine and maybe you're hungry for more true scary accounts, more unsettling cases like these, then please head over to the Horror Docs channel. Make sure to like this deep dive if you found it compelling, share it with others who you think might dare to listen, and definitely subscribe to Horror Docs. That way you won't miss any future narratives that will make you question what's truly out there. Until next time, stay safe out there, and remember, some things are best left undisturbed.